We are living in interesting times, aren't we? We are living in times of course correction, of reversing distortions that have been set in place for many, many, many years and have subsequently informed our experience, our lived experience as a society and collective and globally, obviously, but also the internal programmings that we have had to unravel and alchemize, and that we continue to do so. And if you are a healer, a light worker, a mystic, a practitioner, someone who's here who is of service to others, to support others in their healing, in their evolutionary process, and in our collective evolutionary process, then you are no stranger to this concept, to this work, to the reclamation of who we truly are. A process of remembering, reclaiming, especially in my experience in my circles, of the divine feminine codes that are already within us, but that have been distorted and denigrated around us. So this is a time that is not just about personal empowerment. This is about collective healing of so many things, of the mother wound, of the remembering of our original blueprint, and learning how to be held once again and witnessed in community. Community is something that I hear over and over as a dream, as a longing by so many healers in our community. And it's one that is within my own heart. And yet, there are so many things that are seemingly stacked against it, including our own internal resistance to this concept of community, like true community and what that actually looks like. If you don't know me, hi, welcome. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, Akashic Channel intuitive guide and clinically trained healer devoted to helping you remember your purpose, reclaim your gifts, and walk your sovereign path. And today I want to explore some of these distortions and the original coding that is being revealed in this time, and why community is essential in our healing and reclamation process. Now, there is a long history of denigration, and I'm going to focus on the feminine here because it's part of the work that I am doing today, part of my deep embodied experience here, also as a woman, but also something that is rising, that I see this tide that is rising, especially over the past decade and really now ramping up within my own community of healers and those that I support, but also that we see within the collective. And so when we track back, some of the more obvious points of division and denigration and distortion that we have in written his story, right? That which has been kept in the books. We have persecution, specifically persecution of women and those that were deemed witches. So the witch hunts in history. And we see different geographically where this was happening in different places and in different times. And that's just in our written earth history that we have. Of course, there are cycles of this that are happening beyond what is kept in the history books. And these are distortion codes or programs that are running on our planet and in our consciousness, in our psyches. So there is an internalization of a lot of that. And of course, the wounds that we carry ancestrally in our bloodlines, in our soul memory field, in the Akasha and all of that, that we also are here to heal and to alchemize, to move through. We see the suppression of the mother archetype as another denigration that we see of the divine mother and feminine codes. And we see this in many different ways. We see this in a lot of different lineages and religions and such. And of course, culturally, we see this continuing today in many parts of the world and of our own experience, right? And even in our own internal experience, our own mother wounds. Now, I'm going to touch on that in just a bit and relate it to astrology. But I want to name something that I see come up, and this is coming up for a lot of those that I serve, who are many of them practitioners and healers in their own right, but also those that they serve, like their clients and patients. And it's this collective sense of grief, the felt sense of loss that we all inherently have. Now, there is this core wounding of the great separation, right? So the loss, the core wound, you could say, is being the separation from divine, loving consciousness, God source creation, and the individualization that we have when we incarnate. And we also have a sense of loss that can happen simply through birth, through the act of birth. We are separated from what we know as our first home here on earth, which was our mother's womb. But there's this felt sense of loss of the great mother that I see that is woven through all of that and carried through lineages and lifetimes. And then the distortions of that, which we see as the dark mother, and a lot of the myths and sort of the dark goddesses that show the shadow sides of the mother archetype, the dark mother. And how that too is also a sort of false template or programming that has been woven into our consciousness in here on this planet. So we are here, it is my belief that we are here in this time to heal that, to reverse these distortions and these codes, and to restore the original divine templates of what the great mother is and the divine feminine, of course, like of the divine masculine and the great father and the eros gamos and all of that. But what I am focusing on today is the feminine lineage and the mother codes, which is something that has been really coming through very loudly for me over the past several years in my connection with like the Akashic Records work and my work with other women. So one of the things that I want to touch on now that I mention is how we can see this astrologically. It's very interesting when we look at modern astrology and modern astrology's take on the first house being connected with Aries, and Aries being the first sign of the zodiac and like the initiator and that springtime connection in the northern hemisphere, of course, in connection with spring. But what I have seen to be really connected in with what I would say a core and higher truth, not higher meaning better, that there's any kind of hierarchy, but what I mean is like the resonance of the truth of our actual experience as infinite beings, spiritual beings that are having a human experience, right? Like a material experience, is the template of the Thema Mundi chart. So what is that? The Thema Mundi is what we would call the birth chart of the cosmos or of the world. And this is something that came through as part of an ancient, when we look at different astrological lineages and we look at the Hellenistic tradition, we see the Thema Mundi coming through that, where Cancer is actually the first house and it's Cancer rising. So the chart of the cosmos or the world is Cancer. The rising sign is Cancer. Now, this is interesting because when we look at what is Cancer, Cancer is cardinal water. It's the initiator. It's definitely an initiator, the beginning, and it's the waters of life, the life-giving source of the waters of the mother, of the great mother of creation. And when we look at a lot of the myths of the creation of the cosmos and the world, it begins with sound and light, then water. And we see that life is birthed from the waters. Now, Cancer is connected with the archetype of the mother. And another interesting thing that I see in terms of sort of like the wounding and the distortions is a lot of folks that are more attuned to like modern astrology, where they have a problem with connecting Cancer with the mother. Now, of course, Cancer is much more than just this mother archetype, right? Each sign is. It's very multidimensional. But you cannot extract the mother from Cancer. And when I see folks wanting to do that, and to like where they get irritated whenever someone's like, oh yeah, Cancer's connected with the mother, right there, I lovingly observe that there probably is some sort of mother wound happening there. And now that could be a personal mother wound, or it could be just tapping into the collective mother wound, right? Which we seriously have as a collective. So it's interesting to see that. Nonetheless, we have Cancer rising. It marks summertime in the Northern Hemisphere, where the Hellenistic astrology is birthed, and marking the beginning of the summer, the peak of creation and of blooming life, where everything becomes alive. Now, we have the opposite side of Cancer, which is Capricorn. So that's on the other side of the wheel. And now this is based on a geocentric model, right? Where we are looking at the cosmos from the perspective of being here on Earth. And so these points are connected to fixed stars such as Polaris by the rising house and sign, and also the equinoxes and solstices. So this template of the Thema Mundi fits with that. And Capricorn is on the opposite side of Cancer, so it's the 7th house. And this marking the beginning of the hibernation and life-death polarity. And then as you move into Aquarius in the 8th house, which 8th house is connected with death, that's when we are in the depths of winter in the Northern Hemisphere, and that is the house of death. Now, Cancer is nocturnal and ruled by the moon, which is often connected with the mother. And the next sign over, so if we see the rising sign and the first house of this Thema Mundi chart as Cancer, then the next house, the first house is like the self and being born into this world, right? This cosmos and this world incarnating. And it is natural to be birthed into a mother, through her waters and womb, through her cradle, being nurtured as an infant, and having that emotional safety and nurturance, which is what Cancer is all about. Now, that is the highest expression, right? And like what we're meant to experience coming here on Earth. That's probably not the experience of most people being born here on Earth in this time, and maybe for quite some time. And, everybody has their own birth story, right? I won't get into that. But it's interesting to think when we place Aries here, Aries is the warrior and the fighter. So like literally coming into this incarnation and world fighting, which you could say is also accurate. That's probably more accurate for the majority of people's experiences incarnating here on Earth. But it is more natural to be birthed into that Cancerian emotional, supportive, nurturing mother womb space. Next sign is Leo, which then is coming into the child being risen and playful and shining and, the center of attention, the toddler of like me. And so that's like, not to say that Leos are self-centered, but there is a solar centeredness or orientation with Leo and coming into those very early years. And the second house is about resources, like not just money, but the resources that support us, that we require in order to live. And the sun, which rules Leo, provides that for all of Earth, right? The sun is the stream, the cosmic stream of light codes that literally supports life on Earth. Now, when we also look at, different astrologers have different perspectives on this, but when you look historically, in Hellenistic astrology originated in Egypt, and the Greco-Roman era within Egypt, within the Egyptian context, Sirius is a star, the star of our stars. Sirius rose with Cancer. And in that time, you saw the Nile floods that brought forth the fertility and the life, so that life could grow, so that food and agriculture could thrive. And that was the new year, the beginning. So the sacred star of rebirth, with Sirius directly tying in with Cancer at that time, now with Leo. And so that tuning into that sort of cosmic timing of the birth with Cancer as well. Now, what does this tell us? There's so much more to say about the Thema Mundi, which I'm not going to get into because this isn't an astrology episode per se, like a teaching episode. But here we see this blueprint telling us that we were always meant to be birthed through the Great Mother and through the waters, the sacred waters. And that the archetype of Cancer, the waters, the nurturance, the safety of the womb, that is the original portal. And that is part of the divine feminine codes that we are meant to experience here as humans on Earth. Now, on a personal level, I'm a Cancer sun, and I have a son who's a Cancer rising. So it's been very interesting to be in this body, and to also experience the core essence of a Cancer rising as well through my son, because he's still very little. And, when they are so young, they are just the purest version of themselves. And to witness what that looks like, what is coming through him, is really profound and incredibly humbling. And it's also part of me, my becoming a mother was a part of my own healing of my divine feminine codes and mother wounds, and also something that has been happening my whole life, of having a sense of grief and a lot of the trauma and wounding that was moving through my matrilineal line, my mother's lineage, as well as the mitochondrial DNA and all of that. And an ally that has always been with me since I was little was Rose. And Rose, it's interesting also to witness sort of this rising and reawakening of the Rose consciousness and lineages in this time, also like over the past decade, really. But I feel like it's really palpable right now, which is really beautiful and really needed. So Rose has been really loud for me over the past, I'll say 15 years since my own mother's passing. And there's like a whole story around Rose with that. But it's been this slow process and journey of reconnecting with Rose, the essence of Rose, this lineage, and what are these codes that are coming through Rose. And I had a series of events, experiences where, and I talk about this a little bit on the podcast in previous episodes, but I had some past life experiences come through. And it's interesting because I could even see it in my natal chart and transits that like I was going to be revisiting. And boy, did I. I did so on certain occasions consciously, like through my own hypnosis and past life regression sessions and healing sessions. But I had a few spontaneous rememberings that were jarring, to say the least, and very heavy emotionally, because the lives that came through were those where the feminine energies and codes were directly attacked. And what that looked like, for example, in one life that I was remembering, was the destruction of our temple and the massacre of women and the destruction of the ancient teachings and scriptures and records and all that we held sacred and carried for years and years and years and years. And that was ushering in an age of the dark feminine codes, like the mother wounds that would then subsequently come in, and as well as the dark patriarchy. Now I say dark just to connotate that it's heavy and it's distorted. It's not to say that there's this to be afraid of the dark, right? When we talk, when I just want to name that when I say like the dark mother or like black magic, what I am referring to are distortions and energies that hold intentions that are not for the highest good of everybody, okay? So there's malevolent and benefic intent. And so malevolent intent, what we experience as patriarchy is not like the solar Christ heart-centered version of patriarchy, right? It's a distorted, highly imbalanced, dark side of patriarchy. And we also experience that of the matriarchy. Like there's the dark mother. There are those codes that are not true. They're distortions, false templates that have been woven into our history and experience. And so what I'm experiencing now is that all of this is rising up to be looked at and alchemized and healed. That these reversals and distortions are being remembered or being shown and highlighted now so that they can be healed. So as part of my remembering, what was coming through was Rose, who was there as an ally and reawakening of the Rose lineages. Now, another interesting thing that I want to touch on, and this is something I'm actually, to be fully transparent, still working through. But it's interesting because we live in a reality that is dualistic, whether we like it or not. There is duality that exists in this experience of Earth time. And so that means that everything has its shadow and light side. And what I have witnessed is the distortions that we see happening connected with the moon and with Venus. Now, it's interesting to look at Venus because, a lot of times people say, well, Venus is one of the benefics and Venus is good and Venus is the divine feminine. And like, how can we even see Venus as being like dark or the shadow side of the feminine. And yet, what I have tapped into is that Venus absolutely has been messed with, and that there is interference and distortions in connection with Venus. And we can see this in a lot of different ways. For example, there are some pretty gnarly humans, such as some serial killers, which I will not name, who have very prominent Venuses and like incredible Venus placements. So like when you would look at this person's chart, you would think, man, this person is highly Venusian, and Venus is like in such good condition that you would imagine that this person was loving and you know, like the embodiment of that, what we would exalt as this beautiful version and light version of Venus. But in fact, this person is a psychopath and connected with dark forces. I'm not going to name names. Maybe in a future one we can like look at charts. But there are other things in connection with that Venus, just because it's really well placed, that it really depends on what is influencing that Venus, and who is playing with those Venusian codes, because everything can be distorted. This is why we have to be really discerning, especially if you're a highly sensitive, intuitive person. You have to cultivate so much discernment when it comes to the information you're consuming, the what you're tapping into, tuning into as a channel, because there are distortions everywhere. Now, that's not to make you afraid, but it's to make you aware that that's just the truth. And so where do you go? You have to go within. Because the truth and the wisdom of God's source creator is within you, because you are an infinite spirit being. And the more that you can remember your own song, which is a message that we have been receiving with these Akashic transmissions since the beginning of the podcast, like 8 years ago. Remembering our song is one of the most important things that we can do, because it cultivates discernment and reawakens our true codes of who we are. And that in itself is the healing. And so that's what we are being called to do today. And that's what I have received as the rose as a messenger. And it's really interesting, because when we look at the orbit of Venus and the geometrical shape that she creates through her transit and her orbit, it creates the 5-petal rose and the pentagram. And so then we can see the distortions that can come through, even, for example, with the pentagram and the dark arts in connection with the pentagram. And so like everything that has been denigrated comes from something that is actually pure and good and beautiful and true, because that comes from creation. We, as infinite spirit beings, can create. When we look at the dark forces, the things of this world that have ushered in distorted templates and so much of the pain that we have experienced here, those are coming from an inorganic stream that cannot create, because they are no longer connected to the light and to God's source. And so they have to take what has been created and invert it or distort it. And that's what I see has happened with the moon, with Venus. Now, this goes into deeper topics that I am happy to discuss in our new community called Bloom, which I'm really excited to announce the doors opening for that and to invite you in. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But these are things that we need to be aware of and to cultivate the discernment around what we could call organic and inorganic templates or codes or timelines. And how do you discern? It's by turning in. And that's what we are called to do in this time, especially as healers and for space holders for others. What would it mean to live from the codes of that divine feminine and nurturance and safety and love, like the Cancer rising Thema Mundi, instead of living from distortion, the sacrifice, martyrdom, or having to be born and right away you got to run as the warrior because it is not safe or you need to fight back. Many of us carry persecution wounds, the witch wounds. I see this every day with the people that I work with. There are fears of being seen. There is guilt and shame that we carry, and a sense of over-responsibility. And what I believe is that healing distortions is not a solo journey. Yes, there are solo components, of course, like what only you can do for yourself, but we need spaces where we can be held, seen, mirrored, and supported. We support others, and many with a healer's heart, that's like we literally were born for that, right? It's so natural to be giving, caring, loving, to hold space, to want to be in service. But rarely are we held in reciprocity. Rarely do we know even how to be held or how to receive. So distortions are healed when we witness each other in a field of love. Community now doesn't mean uniformity. So in fact, it's through different vantage points that we receive the full picture and deeper understanding of what truth is. And so reclaiming the feminine is as much about community and coming together with and maybe despite the diversity as it is about the self and healing of the self, because the feminine current flows through connection. So I mentioned my new community. It's called Bloom. And my prayer is that it is a sanctuary for healers, the spirit-led women, practitioners, mystics, light workers who are longing for sisterhood and a safe space where they can be, where their medicine can land, where you are witnessed and held, and that your gifts are received with reverence, and that there is reciprocity, there's exchange. So I created Bloom, and Bloom came through an Akashic transmission a long time ago, and also in conversation with flowers. Yes, flowers and the roses. Surprise, surprise. And again, I will share more about that inside of Bloom and maybe in another episode. But what I received was a space that would be created where we would tap into these different fields and areas of our consciousness to work through these distortions, the wounds that we can alchemize together in community and remember who we are together. Inside Bloom, what I call temple spaces, or what I call temple spaces, which are ever-growing esoteric teachings, the Rose Garden, which is the beginning. We are feminine remembrance together. Hearth, and the temple spaces so far include the Rose Garden, which is connected with divine feminine remembrance. The Alchemy Lab, which will focus on spiritual sciences and consciousness practice and ritual. And the Library of Memory, Alchemy Lab, which will focus on Akashic spiritual sciences and consciousness practice. And the Library of Memory, which will hold also Akashic primarily a community transmissions. And so Bloom is also primarily a community we'll make. And so a big part of bi-weekly connection calls, connections that we will make. Times. We'll have bi-weekly connection calls that include temple tea times. Spontaneously so that's for kismic connections. Also bi-weekly oracle practice circles where you get to do intuitive skill exchanges, practice circles where you get to do intuitive reading exchanges, come do into a space where you feel intuitive readings safe and brave, into a space where you feel safe and brave and on equal footing with everybody. It doesn't matter what your level is. We are here to practice and to cultivate our skills as practitioners and intuitives. And then also monthly Akashic Q&A and Akashic transmissions with me, as well as a thread where you get to exchange, do healing swaps, testimonial swaps as well, whatever it is that you need or you would like to give. This is about sacred exchange. And so there's a space for that inside of Bloom as well. So Bloom, my intention with Bloom is that it's not just a community, it's a living sanctuary where healers are reweaving the web of the feminine together in reciprocity, in presence, and in remembrance. If this is vibing with you, I encourage you to check it out, wildlyrooted.com/bloom. And regardless of whether or not you join us, I would like to invite you to create space for yourself to be held, to be witnessed, to be in community where you are receiving just as much as you are giving, because that's how we begin to heal some of these feminine codes, reversing the distortions. We embody the Holy Grail consciousness in receiving so that we establish a deeper connection with ourselves and the greater community around us. Remembering Cancer as that first house and centering the mother, the great mother, and reclaiming these feminine codes. And this path isn't just about healing and remembering who we are. It's about remembering that we don't have to do it alone. So I invite you to step into Bloom as a founding member if you are really feeling it. Community, yes, can be sort of like this buzzword notion, right? That everybody wants community, but really look truthfully and honestly. And what does community mean for you? And what would that provide for you? And what could you contribute to community? Because true community, real community, requires commitment, accountability, responsibility, things that may not feel so good at first, but it is the pathway to creating a more beautiful world together. And remembering that so much of the pain, the grief, the loss is also the loss of being held and the loss of community and family. So what would that look like? To plug back into a resource where your cup gets filled, where you are held, and how much that would actually give right back out to the community and those that you serve, because that's part of your orientation. I look forward to seeing you inside Bloom if it feels like it's a fit for you. And I'd love to hear how this is landing for you. Your experiences of these wounds or these remembrances of the divine feminine codes within yourself. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to subscribe. Sending you lots of love and blessings. Be well.